The Viking epic, Beowulf, as passed down orally by storytellers from over 1,000 years ago, with minimal adaptation from the Seamus Heany translation. So, the Spear Danes, in days gone by, and the kings who ruled them had courage and greatness. We have heard of those princes' heroic campaigns. There was shield chieftain, scourge of many tribes, a wrecker of mead benches rampaging among foes. This terror of the hall troops had come far, a foundling to start with. He would flourish later on, as his powers waxed and his worth was proved. In the end, each clan on the outlying coasts beyond that whale road had to yield to him and begin to pay tribute. That was one good king. Afterwards, a boy child was born to shield, a cub in the yard, a comfort sent. By God to that nation he knew what they had told, the long times and troubles they'd come through without a leader. So the Lord of Life, the glorious Almighty, made this man renowned. Shield had fathered a famous son. Beow's name was known through the north, and a young prince must be prudent like that, giving freely while his father lives, so that afterwards in age when the fighting starts, steadfast companions will stand beside him and hold the line. Behavior that's admired is the path to power among people everywhere. Shield was still thriving when his time came, and he crossed over into the Lord's keeping. His warrior band did what he bade them when he laid down the law among the Danes. They shouldered him out to the sea's flood, the chief they revered who had long ruled them. A ring-whirled prow rode into the harbor, ice-clad outbound, a craft for a prince. They stretched their beloved lord in his boat, laid out by the mast amidships, the great ring-giver. Far-fetched treasures were piled upon his dead body, and precious gear. I never heard before of a ship so well furbished with battle tackle, bladed weapons, and coats of mail. The mast treasure was loaded on top of him. It would travel far, on out into the ocean's sway. They decked his body no less bountifully with offerings than those first ones did, who cast him away when he was a child and launched him alone out over the waves. And they set up a gold standard high above his head and let him drift to wind and tide, bewailing him and mourning their loss. No man can tell, no wise man in hall or weathered veteran knows for certain who salvaged that load. Then it fell to Beow to keep the forts. He was well regarded and ruled the Danes for a long time after his father took leave of his life on earth, and then his heir, the great half-Dane, held sway for as long as he lived, their elder and warlord. He was 4 times a father, this fighter prince. One by one they entered the world, Heroigar, Hrothgar, and good Halga, and a daughter, I have heard, who was Onella's queen, a balm to the battle-scarred Swede. The fortunes of war favored Hrothgar. Friends and kinsmen flocked to his ranks, young followers, a force that grew to be a mighty army. So Hrothgar's mind turned to hall building. He handed down orders for men to work on the great mead hall, meant to be a wonder of the world forever. It would be his throne room. There he would dispense his God-given goods to young and old, but not the common land or people's lives. Far and wide through the world I've heard orders for work to adorn that wall-stead were sent to many peoples. And soon it stood there, finished and ready in full view, the Hall of Halls. Heorot was the name. He had settled on it, whose utterance was law. Nor did he renege, but doled out rings and torques at the table. The hall towered, its gables wide and high, and awaiting a barbarous burning. That doom abided, but in time it would come, the killer instinct, unleashed among in-laws, the bloodlust rampant. Then a powerful demon, a prowler through the dark, nursed a hard grievance. It harrowed him to hear the din of the loud banquet every day in the hall above, the harp being struck and the clear song of a skilled poet, telling with mastery the man's beginnings, how the Almighty had made the earth, a gleaming plain girdled with waters. In his splendor he set the sun and moon to be earth's lamplight, lanterns for men, and filled the broad lap of the world with branches and leaves and quickened life in every other thing that moved. So times were pleasant for the people there, until finally one, a fiend out of hell, began to work his evil in the world. Grendel was the name of this grim demon, haunting the marches, marauding round the heath and the desolate fens. He had dwelt for a time in misery among the banished monsters, Cain's clan, whom the Creator had outlawed and condemned as outcasts. For the killing of Abel, the eternal Lord had exacted a price. Cain got no good from committing that murder, because the Almighty made him anathema, and out of the curse of his exile there sprang ogres and elves and evil phantoms, and the giants too, who strove with God time and time again until he gave them their reward. So after nightfall Grendel set out for the lofty house of Heorot to see how the ringed Danes were settling into it after their drink. And he came upon them, a company of the best, to sleep from their feasting, insensible to pain and human sorrow. Suddenly then, the god-cursed brutes grew havoc, greedy and grim. He grabbed 30 men from their resting place and rushed to his lair, flushed up and inflamed from the rage, blundering back with the butchered corpses. Then, as dawn brightened and the day broke, Grendel's power of destruction was plain. Their wail was up. They wept to heaven. They mourned under mourning. Their mighty prince, the storied leader, sat stricken and helpless, humiliated by the loss of his guard, bewildered and stunned, staring aghast at the demon's trail in deep distress. He was numb with grief, but got no respite. For one night later the merciless Grendel struck again with more gruesome murders. Malignant by nature, he never showed remorse. It was easy then to meet with a man, shifting himself to a safer distance, to bed in the bothies, for who could be blind to the evidence of his eyes, the obviousness of that hall watcher's hate? Whoever escaped kept a weather eye open and moved away from the hall. So Grendel ruled that land in defiance of right, one against all, until the greatest house in the world stood empty, a deserted wallstead. For 12 winters, seasons of woe, the Lord of the Shieldings suffered under his load of sorrow, and so before long the news was known over the whole world. Sad songs were sung about the beset king, the vicious raids of Grendel, his long and unrelenting feud. Nothing but war. How he would never parley or make peace with any Dane, nor stop his death-dealing, nor pay the death price. No counselor could ever expect fair reparation from those rapid hands. All were endangered, young and old, were hunted down by that dark death shadow who lurked and swooped in the long nights on the misty moors. Nobody knows where the reavers from hell roam on their errands. So Grendel waged his lonely war, inflicting constant cruelties on the people, atrocious hurt. He took over Heorot, haunted the glittering hall after dark, but the throne itself, the treasure seat, he was kept from approaching, for he was the Lord's outcast. These were hard times, heartbreaking, for the Prince of the Shieldings. Powerful counselors, the highest in the land, would lend advice, plotting how best the bold defenders might resist and beat off sudden attacks. Sometimes at pagan shrines they vowed offerings to false idols, swore oaths that the killer of souls might come to their aid and save the people. That was their way, their heathenish hope. Deep in their hearts they remembered hell. The almighty judge of good deeds and bad, the Lord God, head of the heavens and high king of the world, was unknown to these pagans. Oh, cursed is he who in time of trouble had to thrust his soul in the fire's embrace, forfeiting help he has nowhere to turn. But blessed is he who after death can approach the Lord and find friendship in the Father's embrace. So that troubled time continued, woe that never stopped, steady affliction for Halfdane's son, too hard an ordeal. There was panic after dark, people endured raids in the night, riven by terror. When he heard about Grendel, Hygelic's thane Beowulf was on home ground, over in Geatland. There was no one else like him alive. In his day, Beowulf was the mightiest man on earth, high-born and powerful. He ordered a boat that would ply the waves. He announced his plan to sail the Swan's Road and search out the king, the famous prince who needed defenders. Nobody tried to keep him from going. No elder denied him, dear as he was to them. Instead, they inspected omens and spurred his ambition to go, whilst he moved about like a leader he was, enlisting men, the best he could find, with 14 others. The warrior boarded the boat as captain, a canny pilot along coasts and currents.
My mother told me someday I will fly high, carrying indoors.
Time went by. The boat was on the water, in close under the cliffs. Men climbed eagerly up the gangplank. Sand churned in the surf, shining war gear in the vessel's hold, then heaved out, away with a will in their wood-wreathed ship. Over the waves the wind blew behind her, and foam at her neck she flew like a bird, until her curvy prow had covered the distance, and on the following day at due hour those seafarers sighted land, sunlit cliffs, sheer crags, and looming headlands. And landfall they sought. It was the end of their voyage, and the Geats vaulted over the side out into the sand and moored their ship. There was a clash of mail and a thresh of gear. They thanked the good Lord for that easy crossing on a calm sea. When the watchman on the wall, the shielding's lookout, whose job it was to guard the sea cliffs, saw shields glittering in the gangplank and battle equipment being unloaded, he had to find out the who and the what the arrivals were. So he rode to the shore, the horsemen of Hrothgar's, and challenged them in formal terms, flourishing his spear. The watchman called out, "What kind of men are you who arrive rigged out for combat in coats of mail, sailing here over the sea lanes in your steep-hulled boat?" "I have been stationed as a lookout on this coast for a long time. My job is to watch the waves for raiders, a danger to the Danish shore. Never before has a force under arms disembarked so openly, not bothering to ask if the sentries allowed them safe passage, or the clan had consented. Nor have I seen a mightier man-at-arms on this earth than the one standing here, unless I am mistaken. He is truly noble. This is no mere hanger-on in a hero's armor. So now, before you fare and land as interlopers, I have to be informed about who you are and where you hail from. Outsiders from across the water. I'll say it again, the sooner you tell where you came from and why, the better." The leader of the troop unlocked his word hoard. The distinguished one delivered his answer. Beowulf spoke. "We belong by birth to the great people and owe allegiance to our king, Lord Hygelac. In my day, my father was a famous man, a noble warrior by the name Ecgtheow. He outlasted many a long winter and went on his way. All over the world, wise men in council continue to remember him. We come in good faith to find your lord, nation's shield, the son of Halfdane, Hrothgar. Give us the right to advise and direction. We have arrived here on the great errand to the lord of the Danes. and I believe, therefore, there should be nothing hidden or withheld between us. So tell us, if what we have heard is true about this threat, whatever it is, this danger abroad in the dark nights, this corpse-maker mongering death, this demon in the Shieldings country. I come to proffer my wholehearted help and counsel. I can show the wise Hrothgar a way to defeat his enemy and find respite, if any respite is to reach him ever. I can calm the turmoil and terror in his mind, otherwise he must endure woes and live with grief for as long as his hall stands at horizon on its high ground. Undaunted, sitting astride his horse, the coast guard watchman answered, "Anyone with gumption and a sharp mind will take that measure of two things, what's said and what's done. I believe what you have told me, that you are a troop loyal to our king. So come ahead with your arms and your gear, and I will guide you. What's more, I'll order my own comrades on their word of honor to watch your boat. Down there in the sand, keep her safe, in a fresh tar, until the time comes for her curved prow to preen on the waves and bear your heroes back to Geatland. May one so valiant and venturesome come unharmed through the clash of battle." So they went on their way. The ship rode the water, broad-beamed, bound by its hawser and anchored fast. Boar shapes flashed above the cheek guards and brightly forged works of goldsmiths watching over those stern-faced men. They marched in step, hurrying on till the timbered hall of Heorot rose before them, radiant with gold. Nobody on earth knew of another building like it. Majesty lodged there, and its light shone over many lands, so the gallant escort guided them to that dazzling stronghold and indicated the shortest way to it. Then the noblest warrior wheeled on his horse and spoke these words, "It is time for me to go. May the Almighty Father keep over you in his kindness and watch over your exploits. I'm away to sea, back on the alert to watch for enemy raiders." It was a paved track, a path that kept them in marching order. Their mail shirts glinted hard in hand-link. Their high gloss iron of their armors rang. So they duly arrived, in their grim war graith and gear at the hall, and weary from the sea, stacked wide shields of the toughest hardwood against the wall, then collapsed on the benches, battle-dressed and weapons clashed. They collected their spears in a seafarer's stook and a stand of greyish tapering ash, and the troops themselves were as good as their weapons. Then a proud warrior questioned the men concerning their origins. "Where do you come from, carrying these decorated shields and shirts of mail, these cheek-hinged helmets and javelins?" "I'm Hrothgar's herald and officer. I've never seen so impressive or large an assembly of strangers. Stoutness of heart, bravery, not banishment, must have brought you to King Hrothgar." The man whose name was known for courage, the Geat leader resolute in his helmet, Beowulf, answered in return, "We are retainers from Hygelac's band. Beowulf is my name. If your lord and master, the most renowned son of Halfdane, will hear me out and graciously allow me to greet him in person, I am ready and willing to report my errand." Wulfgar, the Wendel chief, replied, renowned as a warrior, well known for his wisdom, and in the temper of his mind, "I will take the king this message in accordance with your wish. Our dear lord, friend of the Danes, the giver of rings, I will go and ask him about your coming, and hurry back with whatever reply it pleases him to give." And with that he turned to where Hrothgar the king sat, the old man among retainers. The valiant followers stood four square in front of his king. He knew the courtesies. Wulfgar addressed his dear lord. "People from Geatland have put ashore. They have sailed far over the wide sea. They call the chief in charge of their band by the name of Beowulf. They beg me, my lord, an audience with you, an exchange of words and a formal greeting. Most gracious Hrothgar, do not refuse them, but grant them a reply. From their arms and appointment they appear well-born and worthy of respect, especially the one who has led them thus far. He is formidable indeed." Hrothgar, king and protector of the Shieldings, replied, "I used to know him when I was a young boy. His father before him was called Ecgtheow. Hrothel the Greek gave Ecgtheow his daughter in marriage. This man is their son, here to follow up an old friendship. A crew of seamen who sailed for me once with a gift cargo across the Geatland returned with marvelous tales about him. A thane, they declared, with a strength of 30, in the grip of each hand. Now holy God has in his goodness guided him here to the West Danes to defend us from Grendel. This is my hope, and for his heroism I will recompense him with a rich treasure. Go immediately, bid him and the Geats he has his attendants to assemble and enter. Say, moreover, when you speak to them, that they are welcome in Denmark." At the door of the hall, Wulfgar duly delivered the message. "My lord, the conquering king of the Danes, bids me to announce that he knows your ancestry, that he welcomes you here to Heorot Hall and salutes your arrival from across the sea. You are free now to move forward to meet Hrothgar, the king, in helmets and armor, but shields must stay here and spears be stacked until the outcome of the audience is clear." The hero, Beowulf, arose, surrounded closely by his powerful warriors. A party remained under orders to keep watch on the arms. The rest proceeded, leading by their prince, under Heorot's roof. And standing on the hearth in webbed links that the smith had woven, the fine forged mesh of his gleaming mail shirt, resolute in his helmet, Beowulf spoke. "Greetings to Hrothgar, king. I am Hygelac's kinsman, one of his hall troop. When I was younger, I had great triumphs. The news of Grendel, hard to ignore, reached me at home. Sailors brought story of the plight you suffer in this legendary hall, how it lies deserted, empty and useless, once the evening light hides itself under heaven's dome. So every elder and experienced councilman among my people supported my resolve to come here to you, King Hrothgar, because all knew of my awesome strength. They had seen me boltered in the blood of enemies when I battled and bound 5 sea beasts, raided a troll nest, and in the night sea slaughtered sea brutes. I have suffered extremes and avenged the Geats. Their enemies brought it upon themselves, but I devastated them. Now I mean to be a match for Grendel, settle the outcome in single combat. And so, my request, O King of the Bright Danes, dear Prince of the Shieldings, friend of the people, as their ring of defense, my one request is that you won't refuse me, who have come this far, the privilege of purifying Heorot Hall, with my own men to help me and nobody else. I have heard, moreover, that the monster scorns in his reckless way to use weapons. Therefore, to heighten Hygelac's fame and gladden his heart, I hereby renounce sword and shelter of the broad shield. The heavy war-board, hand to hand, is how it will be, a life and death fight with this fiend. Whichever one death fells must deem it a just judgment from God. If Grendel wins, it will be a gruesome day. He will glut himself on the Geats in the war hall, swoop without fear on that flower of manhood, as on others before. Then my face won't be there to be covered in death. He will carry me away. As he goes to ground, gorged and bloodied, he will run gloating with my raw corpse, and feed on it alone in a cruel frenzy, fouling his moor nest. No need then to lament for long or lay out my body. If the battle takes me, send back this breast webbing that Wayland fashioned and Hrethel gave me to King Hygelac. Fate goes ever as fate must." King Hrothgar, the Helmet of the Shieldings, spoke. "Beowulf, my friend, you have traveled here to favor us with help and fight for us. There was a feud one time begun by your father. With his own hands he had killed Hitholaf, who was a wolfing, so war was looming, and his people in fear of it forced him to leave. He came away then over rolling waves to the South Danes here, the Sons of Honor. I was then in the full flush of kingship, establishing my sway over all rich strongholds of this heroic land. Hrothgar, my oldest brother and the better man, also son of half-Danes, had died. Finally, I healed the feud by paying the blood money, I shipped a treasure trove to the Wolfings, and Ecgtheow acknowledged me with oaths of allegiance. It bothers me to have to burden anyone with all the grief Grendel has caused and the havoc he has wreaked upon us at Heorot Hall, our humiliations. My household guard are on the wane. Fate sweeps them away easily into Grendel's clutches, but God can easily halt these raids and harrowing attacks. Time and time again, when the goblets passed and seasoned fighters got flushed with beer, they would pledge themselves to protect Heorot and wait for Grendel with whetted swords. But when dawn broke and day crept in, over each empty blood-spattered bench, the floor of the mead hall where they had fasted would be slick with slaughter, and so they died. Faithful retainers in my following dwindled. Now take your place at the table. Relish a triumph of heroes to your heart's content. Then a bench was cleared in that banquet hall so the Geats could have room to be together. The party sat, proud in their bearing, strong and stalwart. An attendant stood by with a decorated pitcher, pouring bright helpings of mead, and the minstrel sang, filling Heorot Hall with his head-clearing voice, gladdening that great rally of Danes and Geats, the Viking warriors. From where he crouched at the king's feet, Unferth, son of Ecglaf, spoke contrary words. Beowulf's coming, his sea-braving, made him sick with envy. He could not brook or abide the fact that anyone else alive under heaven might enjoy a greater regard than he did. "Are you Beowulf who took on Breca in a swimming match on the open sea, risking the water just to prove you could win? It was sheer vanity that made you venture out on the main deep. No matter who tried, friend or foe, to deflect the pair of you, neither would back down. The sea test obsessed you. You waded in, embracing water, taking its measure, mastering currents, riding on the swell. The ocean swayed, winter went wild in the waves, but you vied for 7 nights. Then he outswam you, came ashore the stronger contender. He was cast up safe and sound one morning among the Heatheriums, and made his way to where he belonged in Bronding country, home again sure of his ground and strong room and bod. So Breca made good his boast upon you, and was proved right. No matter, therefore, how you may have fared in every bout and battle until now. This time you'll be worsted. No one has ever outlasted an entire night against Grendel." Beowulf, Ecgtheow's son, replied, "Well, friend Unferth, you have had your say about Breca and me, but it was mostly beer that was doing the talking. The truth is this. When the going was heavy on those high waves, I was the strongest swimmer of all. We'd been children together when we grew up, daring ourselves to outdo each other, boasting and urging each other to risk our lives on the sea. And so it turned out. Each of us swam holding a sword, a naked, hard-proof blade for protection against the whale beasts, but Breca could never move out farther or faster from me than I could manage to move from him. Shoulder to shoulder we struggled on for 5 nights until the long flow and pitch of the waves, the perishing cold night falling and winds from the north drove us apart. The deep boiled up, and its wallowing sent out the sea brutes wild. My armor held me to hold out. My hard-ringed chainmail, hand-forged and linked, a fine, close-fitting filigree of gold, kept me safe when some ocean creature pulled me to the bottom. Pinioned fast and swathed in its grip, I was granted one final chance. My sword plunged, and the ordeal was over. Through my own hands, the fury of battle had finished off the sea beast. Time and again foul things attacked me, lurking and stalking, but I lashed out, gave as good as I got with my sword. My flesh was not for feasting on. There would be no monsters gnawing and gloating over their banquet at the bottom of the sea. Instead, in the morning, mangled and sleeping the sleep of the sword, they slopped and floated on the ocean's leavings. From now on, sailors would be safe. The deep sea raids were over for good. Light came from the east, bright guarantee of God, and the waves would quiet. I could see the headlands and buffeted cliffs. Often, for undaunted courage, fate spares the man it has not already marked. However, it had occurred. My sword had killed 9 sea monsters. Such night dangers and hard ordeals I have never heard of, nor of a man so desolate in surging waves. But worn out as I was, I survived, came through with my life, the ocean lifted and laid me ashore, I landed safe on the coast of Finland. Now, I cannot recall any fight you entered, Unferth, that bears comparison. I don't boast when I say that neither you nor Brecca were ever much celebrated for swordsmanship or for facing danger in the battlefield. You killed your own kith and kin. For all your cleverness and quick tongue, you will suffer damnation in the pits of hell for that. The fact is, Unferth, if you were truly as keen or courageous as you claim to be, Grendel would never have gotten away with such unchecked atrocity, attacks on your king, havoc in Heorot Hall and the horrors everywhere. But he knows he need never be in dread of your blade making a mizzle of his blood, or of vengeance arriving from this quarter, from the victory shieldings the shoulders of the spear. He knows he can trample down you Danes to his heart's content, humiliate and murder without fear of reprisal. But he will find me different. I will show him how Geats shape to kill in the heat of battle. Then whoever wants to may go bravely to the morning mead when morning light, scarfed in sun-dazzle, shines forth from the south and brings another daybreak into the world. Then the grey-haired treasure-giver, king of the Heorot Hall, was glad, far famed in battle, the prince of bright Danes, and keeper of his people, counted on Beowulf. On the warrior's steadfastness and on his word the laughter started, and the din got louder, and the crowd was happy. Wealhtheow came in, Hrothgar's queen, observing the courtesies, adorned in her gold, she graciously saluted the men in the hall, then handed the cup first to Hrothgar, their homeland's guardian, urging him to drink deep and enjoy it, because he was dear to them. Hrothgar drank it down like the warlord he was, with festive cheer. So the helming woman went on her rounds, queenly and dignified, decked out in rings, offering the goblet to all ranks, treating the household and the assembled troop, until it was Beowulf's turn to take it from her hand. With measured words she welcomed the Geat and thanked God for granting her her wish, that a deliverer she could believe in would arrive to ease their afflictions. Beowulf accepted the cup, a daunting man, dangerous in actions and eager for it always. He addressed Wealhtheow. Beowulf, son of Ecgtheow, said, I had a fixed purpose when I put out to sea. As I sat on the boat with a band of men, I meant to perform to the uttermost what your people wanted or perish in the attempt, in the fiend Grendel's clutches. And I shall fulfill that purpose, prove myself with proud deed, or meet my death here in the mead hall. This formal boast by Beowulf the Geat pleased the lady well, and she went to sit by Hrothgar king, regal and arrayed with gold. Then it was like old times in the echoing hall, proud talk and the people happy, loud and excited, until soon enough Halfdane's heir had to be away. To his night's rest, he realized that the demon was going to descend in the hall, that he had plotted all day from dawn to night, until darkness gathered again over the world, and stealthy nightshades came stealing forth under the cloud murk. The company stood. As the two leaders took leave of each other, Hrothgar king wished Beowulf health and good luck, named him hall warden, and announced as follows, Never, since my hand could hold a shield, have I entrusted or given control of the Danes' hall to anyone but you. Ward and guard it, for it is the greatest of houses. Be on your mettle now, keep in mind your fame, beware of the enemy. There's nothing you wish for that won't be yours if you win through alive. Hrothgar departed then, with his house guard, the lord of the shieldings, their shelter in war, left the mead hall to lay with Wealhtheow, his queen and bedmate. The king of glorious people learned had posted a lookout who was a match for Grendel, a guard against monsters, special protection to the Danish prince. And the Geat placed complete trust in his strength of limb and the lord's favor. He began to remove his iron breastmail, took off his helmet, handed his attendant the patterned sword, a smith's masterpiece, ordering him to keep the equipment guarded, and before he bedded down, Beowulf, that prince of goodness, proudly asserted, When it comes to fighting, I count myself as dangerous any day as Grendel, so it won't be a cutting edge I'll wield to mow him down easily as I might. He has no ideas of the arts of war, of shield or sword play, though he does possess a wild strength. No weapons, therefore, for either this night. Unarmed he shall face me he dares, and may the divine Lord in his wisdom grant victory to whichever side he sees fit." Then down the brave man lay with his bolster under his head, and the whole company of sea rovers at rest beside him. None of them expected he would ever see his homeland again or get back to his native place, and the people who reared him, they knew too well the way it was before, how often the Danes had fallen prey to death in the mead hall, but the Lord was weaving a victory on his war loom for the weather geats. Through the strength of one they all prevailed. They would crush their enemy and come through in triumph and gladness. The truth is clear. Almighty God rules over mankind, and always has. Then, out of the night, came the Shadow Stalker, stealthy and swift. The hall guards were slack, asleep at their posts, all except one. It was widely understood that as long as God disallowed it, the fiend could not bear them to his shadow-born. One man, however, was in a fighting mood, awake and on the edge, spoiling for action. In off the moors, down through the mist bands, God-cursed Grendel came greedily loping. The bane of the race of men roamed forth, hunting for prey in the high hall. Under the cloud murk he moved towards it, until it shone above him a sheer keep of fortified gold. Nor was that the first time Grendel had scouted grounds for Hrothgar's dwelling, although never in his life before or since did he find harder fortune than hall defender. Spurned and joyless, Grendel journeyed on ahead and arrived at the bawn. The iron-braced door turned on its hinge when his hand touched it. Then his rage boiled over. He ripped open the mouth of the building, maddened for blood, pacing the length of the patterned floor. With his loathsome tread, with a baleful light, flame more than light flared from his eyes. He saw many men in the mansion sleeping, a ranked company of kinsmen and warriors quartered together. His glee was demonic. Picturing the mayhem before morning, he would rip life from limb and devour them, feed on their flesh. But his fate that night was due to change. His days of ravening had come to an end. Mighty and canny, Hygelic's kinsman, Beowulf, was keenly watching for the first move the monster would make. Nor did the creature keep him waiting, but struck suddenly and started in. He grabbed and mauled the man on his bench, bit to his bone weapons, bolted down his blood and gorged on him in lumps, leaving the body utterly lifeless, eaten up hand and foot. Venturing closer, his talon was raised to attack Beowulf. Where he lay on his bed, he was bearing him with open claw, and the alert hero's comeback and arm lock gripped him and forestalled him utterly. The captain of evil, Grendel, discovered himself in a hand grip harder than anything he had ever encountered in any man on the face of the earth. Every bone in his body quailed and coiled, but he could not escape. He was desperate to flee to his den and hide with the devil's litter, for in all his days he had never been clamped or cornered like this. Then Hygelic's trusty retainer Beowulf recalled his bedtime speech, sprang to his feet and got a firm hold. Fingers were bursting, the monster backtracking, the man overpowering. The dread of the land was desperate to escape and take roundabout road and flee to his lair in the fens. The latching power in his fingers weakened. It was the worst trip the terrormonger had taken to Heorot Hall. And now the timbers trembled and sang, a hall session that harrowed every Dane inside the stockade. Stumbling in fury, the two contenders crashed through the building. The hall clattered and hammered, but somehow survived the onslaught and kept standing. It was handsomely structured, a sturdy frame braced with the best blacksmith's work inside and out. The story goes that as the pair struggled, the mead benches were smashed and sprung off the floor, gold fittings and all. Before then, no shielding elder would believe that there was any power or person on earth capable of wrecking their horn-rigged hall, unless the burning embrace of fire engulfed it in flames. Then an extraordinary wail arose, and bewildering fear came over the Danes. Everyone felt it, who heard that cry as it echoed off the wall, a god-cursed scream and strain of catastrophe. The howl of a loser, the lament of the hell-serf Grendel kneeling his wound. He was overwhelmed, manacled tight by the man who of all men was foremost and strongest in the days of this life. But Beowulf, the Earl Troop's leader, was not inclined to allow his caller to depart alive. He did not consider that life of much account to anyone, anywhere. Time and again, Beowulf's warriors worked to defend their lord's life, laying about them as best they could with their ancestral blades. Stalwart in action, they kept striking out on every side, seeking to cut straight to the soul. When they joined the struggle, there was something they could not have known at the time, that no blade on earth, no blacksmith's art could ever damage their demon opponent, Grendel. Grendel had conjured the harm from every cutting edge of every weapon with a dark spell, but his going away out of the world and the days of his life would be agony to him. His alien spirit would travel far into fiends' keeping. Then he, who had harrowed the hearts of men with pain and affliction in former times, and had given offense upon offense to God, found his bodily powers failing him. Hygelac's kinsman Beowulf kept him helplessly locked in hand grip. As long as either lived, he was hateful to each other. The monster's whole body was in pain. A tremendous wound appeared on his shoulder. Sinews split, and the bone lappings burst. Beowulf was granted the glory of winning by God. Grendel was driven under the fen banks, fatally hurt. To his desolate lair, his days were numbered. The end of his life was coming over him. He knew it for certain, and one bloody clash had fulfilled the dearest wishes of the Danes. The man who had lately landed among them, proud and sure, had purged the hall, kept it from harm. He was happy with his night work and the courage he had shown. The Geat captain Beowulf had boldly fulfilled his boast to the Danes. He had healed and relieved a huge distress, unremitting humiliations. The hard fate he'd been forced to undergo, no small affliction. Clear proof of this could be seen in the hand the hero displayed high up near the roof, the whole of Grendel's shoulder and arm, his awesome grip. Then morning came, and many a warrior gathered, as I have heard, around the gift hall, clan chiefs flocking from far and near, down wide-ranging roads, wondering greatly at the monster's footprint. His fatal departure was regretted by no one who witnessed his trail, the ignominious marks of his flight, where he'd sulked away, exhausted in spirit, beaten in battle, bloodying the path, hauling his doom to the demon's mere. The bloodshot water wallowed and surged. There were loathsome upthrows and overturnings of waves and gore and wood slurry. With his death upon him, Grendel had dived deep into the marsh den, drowned out his life and his heathen soul. Hell claimed him there. Then away they rode, the old retainers, with many a young man following after, a troop on horseback and high spirits on their bay steeds. Beowulf's doings were praised over and over again. Nowhere, they said, north or south, between the two seas or under the tall sky and the broad earth, was there anyone better to raise a shield or rule a kingdom. Yet there was no laying of blame on their lord, the noble King Hrothgar. He was a good king. At times the warband broke into a gallop, letting their chestnut horses race wherever they found the going good of those well-known tracts. Meanwhile, a thane of the king's household, a carrier of tales, a traditional singer deeply schooled in the lore of the past, linked a new theme to a strict meter. The man started to recite with skill, rehearsing Beowulf's triumphs and feats, and well-fashioned lines entwining his words. The minstrel told what he'd heard, repeated in songs of Sigmund's exploits, all of the many feats and marvels, the struggles and wanderings of Wæl's son, things unknown to anyone except Vitella, feuds and foul doings, confided from uncle to nephew when he had felt the urge to speak of them. Always they had been partners in the fight, friends in need. They had killed giants, their conquering swords had brought them down. The minstrel sang. The story rang through the halls of Sigmund's heroic exploits. When Hrothgar king arrived at the hall, he spoke, standing on the steps under the steep eaves, gazing at the roof work and Grendel's talon. First and foremost, let the Almighty Father be thanked for this sight. I have suffered long, harrowing by Grendel. but the heavenly shepherd can work his wonders always and everywhere. Not long since it seemed I would never be granted the slightest solace or relief from any of my burdens. Best of houses glittered and reeked and ran with blood. This one worry outweighed all the others, a constant distress to counselors, and entrusted with defending the people's forts from assault by monsters and demons. But now a man with the Lord's assistance has accomplished something none of us could manage before now. For all our efforts, whoever she was who brought forth this flower of manhood, if she be still alive, that woman can say that in her labor the Lord of ages bestowed a grace on her. So now, Beowulf, adopt you in my heart as a dear son. Nourish and maintain this new connection, you noblest of men. There's nothing you'll want for, nor worldly good that won't be yours. I have often honored smaller achievements, recognized warriors not nearly as worthy as you, lavished rewards on the less deserving. But you have made yourself immortal by your glorious action. May the Lord of ages continue to keep and requite you as well. Beowulf, son of Ecgtheow, spoke. We have gone through a glorious endeavor, and have been much favored in this fight we dared against the unknown. Nevertheless, if you could have seen the monster himself, where he lay beaten, I would have been better pleased. My plan was to pounce, pin him down in a tight grip, grapple him to death, have him panting for life, powerless and clasped in my bare hands, his body in thrall. But I couldn't stop him from slipping my hold. The Lord allowed it. My lock on him wasn't strong enough. He struggled fiercely and broke and ran. Yet he bought his freedom at a high price, for he left his hand and arm and shoulder to show us he had been here, a cold comfort for having come among us. He won't now be long in this world. He has done his worst, but the wound will end him. He has hasped and whooped and hurpling with pain, limped and looped in it, like a man outlawed for wickedness. He must await the mighty judgment of God in his majesty. There was less tampering and big talk then from Unferth the boaster, less of his blather, as the hall thanes eyed the awful proof of the hero's prowess, the splayed hand of Grendel under the eaves. Every nail, claw, scale, and spur, every spike and welt on the hand of that heathen brute was like barbed steel. Everybody said there was no honed iron hard enough to pierce him through, no time-proof blade that could cut his brutal blood-caked claw. Then the order was given for all hands to help refurbish Heorot immediately, men and women thronging the wine hall getting it ready, gold threads shone in the wall hangings, woven scenes that attracted and held the eye's attention. But iron braced as the inside of it had been, the bright rooms lay in ruins now. The very doors had been dragged from their hinges. Only the roof remained unscathed. By the time the guilt-fouled fiend turned tail in despair of his life, but death is not easily escaped from by anyone. All of us with souls, earth-dwellers, and children of men, must make our way to a destination already ordained, where the body, after banqueting, sleeps on its deathbed. Then the due time arrived for Halfdane's son to proceed to the hall. The king himself, Hrothgar, would sit down to feast. No group ever gathered in greater numbers or better order around their ring-giver king, the benches filled with famous men who fell to with relish. Round upon round of mead was passed. Those powerful kinsmen, Hrothgar and Hrothulf, were in high spirits in the raftered hall. Inside Heorot there was nothing but friendship. The shielding nation was not yet familiar with feud and betrayal. Then Halfdane's son Hrothgar presented Beowulf with gold standards as a victory gift, an embroidered banner, also breastmail and a helmet, a sword carried high. That was both a precious object and a token of honor, so Beowulf drank his drink at ease. He was hardly ashamed to be showered with such gifts in front of the hall troops. There haven't been many moments, I'm sure, where men have exchanged for such treasures at so friendly a sitting. An embossed ring, a band lapped with wire, arched over the helmet, head protection, to keep the keen ground cutting edge from damaging it when danger threatened and the man was battling behind his shield. Next the king ordered 8 horses with gold bridles to be brought through the yard into the hall. The harness of one included a saddle of sumptuous design, the battle seat where the son of Halfdane rode where he wished to join the swordplay. Wherever the killing and carnage were worse, he would be the fore, fighting hard. The Danish prince, descendant of Ing, handed over both the arms and the horses, urging Beowulf to use them well. And so their leader, their lord and guard of coffer and strong room, with customary grace bestowed upon Beowulf both sets of gifts. A fair witness can see how well each one behaved. The chieftain went on to reward the others. Each man on the bench who had sailed with Beowulf and risked the voyage received a bounty, some treasured possession, and compensation, a price in gold, was settled for the Geat Grendel had killed cruelly earlier, as he would have killed more had not mindful God and one man's daring prevented that doom. Past and present, God's will prevails, hence understanding is always best, and a prudent mind, whoever remains for long here in this earthly life, will enjoy and endure more than enough. They sang then, and played to please the hero, words and music for their warrior prince, harp tunes and tales of adventure. There were high times on the hall benches, and the king's poet performed his part, with the saga of Finn and his sons, unfolding the tale of fierce attack on the Friesland, when Hnef, king of the Danes, met his death. Out the story rang, applause filled the hall. Then Wealhtheow pronounced in the presence of the company, "Take delight in this torque, dear Beowulf. Wear it for luck, and also wear this mail. From our people's armory may you prosper in them. Be acclaimed or strength for kindly guidance to these two boys, and your bounty will be sure. You have won renown. You are known to all men far and near, now and forever. Your sway is wide, and your winds home as the sea around the cliffs. So, my prince, I wish you a lifetime's luck and blessings to enjoy this treasure. Treat my sons with tender care, be strong and kind. Here each comrade is true to each other, loyal to lord, loving in spirit. The thanes have one purpose, the people are ready. Having drunk and pledged, the ranks do as I bid." She moved then to her place. Men were drinking wine at that rare feast. How could they know fate, the grim shape of things to come, yet the threat looming over many thanes as night approached? King Hrothgar prepared to retire to his quarters. Retainers in great numbers were posted on guard. As so often in the past, benches were pushed back, bedding and gear and bolsters spread across the floor, and one man lay down to his rest, already marked for death. At their heads they placed polished timber battle shields, and on the bench above them each man's kit was kept to hand. A towering war helmet, webbed mail shirt, and a great shafted spear. It was their habit, always and everywhere, to be ready for action, at home or in camp, in whatever the case. At whatever the time the need arose to rally round their lord. They were a right people. Then they went to sleep. One paid dearly for his night's ease, as had happened to them often, ever since Grendel occupied the Gold Hall, committing evil until the end came, death after his crimes. Then it became clear, obvious to everyone once the fight was over, that an avenger still lurked and was alive, grimly biding time. Grendel's mother. Monstrous hell-bride, brooded on her wrongs. She had been forced down into fearful waters, the cold depths, after Cain had killed Abel, his father's son, felled his own brother with a sword, banished an outlaw. Marked by having murdered, he moved into the wilds, shunning company and joy. And from Cain there sprang misbegotten spirits of wickedness, among them Grendel, the banished and accursed, due to come to grips with the watcher Beowulf and Heorot waiting to do battle. The monster wrenched and wrestled with him, but Beowulf was mindful of his mighty strength, the wondrous gifts God had showered on him. He relied for help on the Lord of all, on his care and favor, and so overcame the foe, brought down the hell brute, broken and bowed, outcast from all sweetness, the enemy of mankind, made for his death den. But now his mother had sallied forth on a savage journey, grief-racked and ravenous, desperate for revenge. Grendel's mother came to Heorot. There, inside the hall, Danes lay asleep, earls who would soon endure a great reversal once Grendel's mother attacked and entered. Her onslaught was less, only by as much as an Amazon warrior's, and less than an armored man's, when hefted sword, its hammer's edge and gleaming blades slathered in blood, raises the sturdy boar ridge off a helmet. Then in the hall, hard-honed swords were grabbed from the bench, many a broad shield lifted and braced. There was little thought of helmets or woven mail when they woke in terror. The hell dam was in panic, desperate to get out in mortal terror the moment she was found. Grendel's mother pounced and took one of the retainers in a tight hold and headed back to the fen. To Hrothgar King, this man was the most beloved, one of his friends he had trusted between the two seas. Grendel's mother had done away with a great warrior, ambushed him at sleep. Beowulf was elsewhere. Earlier, after the reward of the treasure, the Geat had been given another lodging. There was an uproar in Heorot Hall. Grendel's mother had snatched her trophy, Grendel's bloodied hand. It was a fresh blow to the afflicted Ban. The bargain was hard, both parties having to pay with the lives of friends. And the old lord, the grey-haired warrior, was heartsore and weary. When he heard the news, his highest-placed adviser, his dearest companion, friend, was dead and gone. Beowulf was quickly brought to the chamber. The winner of fights, the arch-warrior, came first footing in with his fellow troops, to where the king in his wisdom waited, still wondering whether Almighty God would ever turn the tide of his misfortunes. So Beowulf entered with his band in attendance, and the wooden floorboards banged and rang as he advanced, hurrying to address the prince of the Danes, asking if he'd rested, since the urgent summons had come as a surprise. Then Hrothgar, the shielding's helmet, spoke. "Rest? What is rest? Sorrow has returned, alas for the Danes. Aeshere is dead. He was Hermenelof's elder brother, a soulmate to me, a true mentor, my right-hand man when the ranks clashed, and our boar crests had taken a battering in the line of action. Aeshere was everything the world admires, and a wise man and a friend. Then this roaming killer came in fury and slaughtered him in Heorot Hall. Where she is hiding, glutting on the corpse, glorying in her escape, I cannot tell. She has taken up the feud, because of the last night when you killed Grendel, wrestling and racking him in ruinous combat, since for too long he had terrorized us with his depredations. He died in battle, paid with his life, and now this powerful other one arrives, Grendel's mother, this force for evil, driven to avenge her kinsman's death, or so it seems to thanes in their grief, and the anguish every thane endures, at the loss of a ring-giver, now that the hand that bestowed so richly has been stilled in death. I have heard it said by my people in Hall, counselors who lived in the upland country, that they have seen two such creatures prowling the moors, huge marauders from on some other world. One of these things, as far as anyone ever can discern, looks like a woman. The other, warped in the shape of a man, moves beyond the pale, bigger than any man in unnatural birth, called Grendel by the country people in former days before his death. They are fatherless creatures of Cain, and their whole ancestry is hidden in a past of demons and ghosts. They dwell apart among wolves on hills, on windswept crags and treacherous caches, where stone streams pour down the mountains and disappear under mist and moorland. A few miles from here, a frost-stiffened wood waits and keeps watch above a mere. The overhanging bank is a maze of tree roots mirrored on its surface. At night there something uncanny happens, the water burns, and the mere bottom has never been sounded by the sons of men. On its bank the heather stepper halts. The hart in flight from pursuing hounds will turn and face them with firm-set horns and die in the wood rather than dive beneath that surface. This is no good place. When the wind blows up and the stormy weather makes clouds scud and skies weep, out of the depths a dirty surge is pitched towards heaven. Now help depends again on you and you alone. The gap of danger where the demon waits is still unknown to you. Seek it if you dare. I will compensate you for settling the feud as you did last time, with lavish wealth, coffers of coiled gold if you come back." Beowulf, son of Ecgtheow, spoke. "Wise sir, do not grieve. It is always better to avenge dear ones than to indulge in mourning. For every one of us living in this world means waiting for our end. Let whoever can win glory before death. When a warrior is gone, that will be his best and only bulwark. So arise, my lord, and let us immediately set forth on the trail of this troll dam. I guarantee you she will not get away, not to dens underground, nor upland groves, nor the ocean floor. She'll have nowhere to flee to. Endure your troubles today. Bear up, and be the man I expect you to be." With that, the old lord sprang to his feet and praised God for Beowulf's pledge. Then a bit and a halter were brought for his horse with a plaited mane. The wise king mounted the royal saddle and rode out in style with force of shield-bearers. The forest paths were marked all over the monster's tracks, across the dark moors, dragging away the body of the Thane, Hrothgar's best, counselor and overseer of the country. So the noble princes proceeded undismayed up fells and screes, up narrow footpaths and ways where they were forced to single file, ledges on cliffs above lairs of water monsters. He went in front with a few men, good judges of the lies of land, and suddenly discovered the dismal wood, mountain trees growing out at an angle above grey stones. The bloodshot water surged underneath. It was a sore blow to all the Danes, friends of the Shieldings, a hurt to each and every one of that noble company when they came upon the head of Echeré at the foot of the cliff. Everybody gazed at the hot gore, kept wallowing up, and an urgent war horn repeated its notes. The whole party sat down to watch. The water pool was infested with all kinds of teeming reptiles. There were writhing sea dragons and monsters slouching on the slopes by the cliff, serpents and wild things such as those that often surface at the dawn to roam the sail road and doom the voyage. Down these plunged, lashing in anger at the loud call of the battle bugle. An arrow from the bow of the Geat chief got one of them as he surged to the surface. The seasoned shaft of Beowulf struck deep in his flank, and his freedom in the water got less and less. It was his last swim. He was swiftly overwhelmed in the shallows, prodded by barbed boar spears of the Vikings, cornered, beaten, pulled up on the banks. A strange lake birth, a loathsome catch, men gazed at in awe. Beowulf got ready, donned his war gear, indifferent to death. His mighty hand-forged, fine-webbed mail would soon meet with the menace under water. It would keep the bone cage of his body safe. No enemy's clasp could crush him in it. No vicious arm lock could choke the life out. To guard his head, he had a glittering helmet that was due to be muddied on the mare bottom and blurred up in the swirl. It was of beaten gold, princely headgear hooped and hasped by a weaponsmith who had worked wonders in days gone by, and adorned it with boar shapes. Since then it had resisted every sword, and another item lent by Unferth at the moment that was of no small importance. The Brehon handed him a hilted weapon, a rare and ancient sword named Hrunting. The iron blade with its ill-boding patterns had been tempered in blood. It had never failed the hand of anyone who hefted it in battle, anyone who had fought and faced the worst in the gap of danger. This was not the first time it had been called on to perform heroic feats. When he lent that blade to the better swordsman, Unferth, the strong-built son of Ecglaf, could hardly have remembered the ranting speech he had made in the cups. He was not man enough to face the turmoil of a fight under water and risk his life. So there he lost fame and repute. It was different for the other, Beowulf, rigged out in his gear, ready to do battle. Then Beowulf, son of Ecgtheow, spoke. Wisest of kings, now that I have come to the point of action, I ask you to recall what we said earlier, that you, son of Halfdane, and gold friend to retainers, that you, if I should fall and suffer death while serving your cause, would act like a father to me after. If this combat kills me, take care of my young company, my comrade in arms, and be sure also, my beloved Hrothgar, to send Hygelec the treasures I received. Let the lord of the Geats gaze on that gold, let Hrethel's son take note of it, and see that I found a ring-giver of rare magnificence, and enjoy the good gift of his generosity. And Unferth is to have what I inherited. To that far-famed man I bequeath my own sharp-honed, wave-sheened wonder blade. With Hrunting I shall gain glory or die. After these words, the prince of the Weather Geats was impatient to be away, and plunged suddenly, without more ado. He dived into the heaving depths of the lake. It was the best part of a day before he could see the solid bottom. Quickly the one who had haunted these waters, who had scavenged and gone her gluttonous rounds for 100 seasons, sensed a human. Grendel's mother observed her outlandish lair from above. So she lunged and clutched and managed to catch Beowulf in her brutal grip, but his body, for all that, remained unscathed. The mesh of the chainmail saved him on the outside. Her savage talons failed to rip the web of his war shirt. Then once she touched the bottom, the wolfish swimmer carried the ring-mailed prince to her court, so that for all his courage he could never use the weapons he carried. When a bewildering horde came at him from the depths, droves of sea beasts who attacked him with tusks and tore his chainmail in a ghastly onslaught. The gallant man could see he had entered some hellish turn-hole, and yet the water did not work against him, because the hall roofing held off the force of the current. There he saw firelight, a gleam and a flare-up, a glimmer of brightness, and air to breathe. The hero observed that the swamp thing from hell, the Tarn hag in all her terrible strength, Grendel's mother, at her he heaved his war sword and swung his arm. The decorated blade came down ringing and singing on her head, but he soon found his battle torch extinguished. The shining blade refused to bite. It spared her and failed the man in his need. It had gone through many hand-to-hand fights and hewed the armor and helmets of the doomed, but here at last the fabulous power of that heirloom failed. Hygelac's kinsman kept thinking about his name and fame. Beowulf never lost heart. Then in fury he flung the sword away. The keen inlaid worm-looped patterned steel was hurled to the ground. He would have to rely on the might of his own arm. So a man must do who intends to gain enduring glory in combat. Life doesn't cost him thought. The prince of the war Geats, warming to his fight with Grendel's mother, gripped her shoulder and laid about him in a battle frenzy. He pitched his killer opponent to the floor, but she rose quickly and retaliated, grappling him tightly in her grim embrace. The sure-footed fight fell daunted. The strongest of warriors stumbled and fell. So she pounced on him and pulled out a broad, whetted knife. Now she could avenge her only child. But the mesh of his chainmail on Beowulf's shoulders shielded his life, turned the edge and the tip of the blade. The son of Ecgtheow would surely have perished, and the Geats lost their warrior under the wide earth, had the strong links and locks of his war gear not helped save him. Holy God decided the victory. It was easy for the Lord, the ruler of heaven, to redress the balance once Beowulf got back up on his feet. Then he saw a blade that boded well, a sword in her armory, an ancient heirloom from the days of the giants, an ideal weapon, one that any warrior would envy. But so huge and heavy itself, only Beowulf could wield it in battle. So the Shielding's hero hard-pressed and enraged took firm hold of the hilt and swung the blade in an arc, a resolute blow that bit into her neck bone, Grendel's mother, severing it entirely, toppling the doomed house of her flesh. Grendel's mother fell to the floor. The sword dripped blood. The swordsman was elated. A light appeared, and the place brightened the way the sky does when heaven's candle is shining clearly. Beowulf inspected the vault, with the sword held high, its hilt raised to guard and threaten. Hygelac's thanes scouted by the walls in Grendel's wake. Now the weapon was to prove its worth. The warrior determined to take revenge for every gross act Grendel had committed, and not only for that one occasion where he'd come to slaughter the sleeping troops. 15 of Hrothgar's house guards surprised on their benches and ruthlessly devoured, but as many again as carried away a brutal plunderer. Beowulf, in his fury, now settled that score. He saw the dead body of the monster Grendel in his resting place, war-weary and wrecked, a lifeless corpse, a casualty of the battle of Heorot, and his arm. The body gaped at the stroke dealt to it after death. Beowulf cut Grendel's corpse head off. Immediately the counselors kept a lookout with Hrothgar watching the lake water, saw heave up in a surge of waves and blood in the backwash. They bowed their grey heads, spoke in their sage, experienced way about a good warrior, how they never again expected to see the prince returning in triumph. To their king, it was clear to many that the wolf of the deep had destroyed Beowulf forever. The 9th hour of the day arrived. The brave Shieldings abandoned their cliff tops in the afternoon, and the king went home, but sick at heart. Staring at the mare, the strangers held on. They wished without hope to behold their lord Beowulf himself. Meanwhile, down underneath the water, the sword began to wilt into gory icicles, to slather and thaw. It was a wonderful thing, the way it melted as ice melts when the father eases the fetters off the frost and unravels the water ropes. He who wields power over time and tide, he is the true lord. The Geat captain, Beowulf, saw treasure in abundance, but carried no spoil from these quarters, except for the head of Grendel and the inlaid hilt of the giant-slaying sword. Embossed with jewels, its blade had melted, and the scroll-work on it burnt, so scalding was the blood of the poisonous fiend who perished there, Grendel's mother. Then he swam, the one who had survived the fall of his enemies, flailing to the surface. The wide waters, the waves and pools were no longer infested once the wandering fiend let go of her life in this unreliable world. The seafarer's leader made for the land, resolutely swimming, delighted with his prize, the mighty load he was lugging to the surface. His thanes advanced in a troop to meet him, thanking God and taking great delight in seeing their Prince Beowulf back safe and sound. Quickly the hero's helmet and mail shirt were loosed and unlaced. The lake settled, clouds darkened above the bloodshot depths. With high hearts they headed away along footpaths and trails through the fields, roads that they knew, each of them wrestling with the head of Grendel they were carrying from the lakeside cliff. Men kingly in their courage and capable of difficult work, it was the task of 4 of these warriors to hoist Grendel's head on a spear and bear it under strain to the bright hall. But soon enough they neared the place, 14 Geats in fine fettle striding across the outlying ground, and a delighted throng around their leader. In he came then, the Thane's commander Beowulf, the arch-warrior, to address Hrothgar king. His courage was proven, his glory secure. Grendel's head was hauled by the hair, dragged across the floor where people were drinking, a horror for both queen and company to behold. They stared in awe. It was an astonishing sight. Beowulf, son of Ecgtheow, spoke, "So, son of Halfdane, prince of the Shieldings, we are glad to bring this booty from the lake. It is a token of triumph, and we tender it to you. I barely survived the battle under water. It was hard fought, a desperate affair. It could have gone badly if God had not helped me. The outcome would have been quick and fatal. Although Hrunting was a hard-edged blade, I could never bring it to bear in the battle. But the Lord of Men allowed me to behold, for he often helps the unbefriended, an ancient sword shining on the wall, a weapon made for slaying giants, there for the wielding. Then my moment came in the combat, and I struck the dweller of that den. Next thing the Damascene sword blade melted, it bloated and burnt in their rushing blood. I have wrested the hilt from the enemy's hand, avenged the evil done to the Danes. It is what was due. And this I pledge, O Prince of the Shieldings, you can sleep secure with your company of troops in Heorot Hall. Never need you fear for a single thane of your sept or nation, young warriors or old, that laying waste of life that you and your people endured of yore." Then the gold hilt was handed over to the old Lord Hygelac, a relic from long ago for the venerable ruler. That rare smith work was passed on to the Prince of Danes when those devils perished, once death removed that murdering, guilt-steeped, god-cursed fiend Grendel, eliminating his unholy life and his mother's as well. It was willed that the king, who of all the lavish gift lords of the north was the best regarded between the 2 seas. Hrothgar king spoke. He examined the hilt, the relic of old times. It was engraved all over, and showed how war first came into the world, and the flood destroyed the tribe of giants. They suffered terrible severance from the Lord. The Almighty made the waters rise, drowned them in the deluge for their retribution. In pure gold inlay on the sword guards there were rune markings, correctly incised, stating and recording for whom the sword had first been made and ornamented with its scrollwork hilt. Then everyone hushed as the son of Halfdane spoke his wisdom. "A protector of people, pledged to uphold truth and justice and to respect tradition, is entitled to affirm that this man was born to distinction. Beowulf, my friend, your fame is gone far and wide. You are known everywhere. In all things you are even-tempered, prudent, and resolute. So I stand firm by the promise of friendship we exchanged before. Forever you will be your people's mainstay and your own warrior's helping hand." Heremod was different, the way he behaved to Ekwalla's sons. His rise in the world brought little joy to the Danish people, only death and destruction. He vented his rage on people he caroused with, killing his own comrades, a pariah king who cut himself off from his own kind, even though God Almighty had made him eminent and powerful and marked him from the start for a happy life. But a change happened. He grew bloodthirsty and gave rings no more to honor the Danes. Heremod suffered in the end for having plagued his people for so long. His life lost happiness. So learn from this and understand true values. I, who tell you, have wintered into wisdom. It is a great wonder how Almighty God in his magnificence favors our race with rank and scope and gift of wisdom. His sway is wide. Sometimes he allows the mind of a man of distinguished birth to follow its bent, grants him fulfillment and felicity on earth, and forts to command in his own country. He permits him to lord it in many lands until the man in his unthinkingness forgets that it will ever end for him. He indulges his desires. Illness and old age mean nothing to him. His mind is untroubled by envy or malice or thought of enemies with their hate-honed swords. The whole world conforms to his will. He is kept from the worst until an element of overweening enters him and takes hold. When the soul's guard, its sentry drowses, grown too distracted, a killer stalks him, an archer who draws a deadly bow, and then the man is hit in the heart. The arrow flies beneath his defenses. The devious promptings of the demons start. His old possessions seem paltry to him now. Greed. He covets and resents, dishonors customs, bestows no gold, and because of good things that heaven's power gave him in the past, he ignores the shape of things to come. Then finally the end arrives, when the body he was lent collapses and falls, prey to its death, ancestral possessions, and the goods he hoarded inherited by another who lets them go with a liberal hand. O flower of warriors, beware of that trap. Choose, dear Beowulf, the better part of eternal reward. Do not give way to pride. For a brief while your strength is still in bloom, but it fades quickly, and soon there will follow illness, or a sword to lay you low, or a sudden fire, or surge of water, or jabbing blade or javelin from the air, or repellent age. Your piercing eye will dim and darken, and death will arrive, dear warrior, to sweep you away. Just so I ruled the Ring-Danes' country for 50 years, defending them in wartime with spear and sword against constant assaults. But many tribes I came to believe my enemies had faded from the face of the earth. Still, what happened was a hard reversal from bliss to grief. Grendel struck after lying in wait. He laid waste the land, and from the moment my mind was in dread of his depredations. So I praise God in his heavenly glory that I live to behold his head dripping blood. After such harrowing I can look upon it in triumph at last. Take your place then, Beowulf, with pride and pleasure, and move to the feast. Tomorrow morning our treasure will be shared and showered upon you. Beowulf was elated and gladly obeyed the old man's bidings. He sat on the Viking bench, and soon all was restored, the same as before. Happiness came back, the hall was thronged, and a banquet set forth. Black night fell and covered them in darkness. Then the company rose for the old campaigner. The grey-haired prince was ready for bed. A need for rest came over the brave, shield-bearing Geat Beowulf. He was a weary seafarer far from home, so immediately a house guard guided him out, one whose office entailed looking after whatever a thane on the road in those days might need or require. It was a noble courtesy. The great heart rested. The hall towered, gold-shingled and gabled, and the guests slept in it, under the black raven with raucous glee, announcing heaven's joy in a hurry of brightness overrunning the shadows. Warriors rose quickly, impatient to be off to their own country, was beckoning to the nobles, and the bold voyager longed to be aboard his distant boat. Then the stalwart warrior Beowulf ordered Hrunting the sword to be brought to Unferth, and bade Unferth to take the sword, and thanked him for lending it. He said he had found it a friend in battle and a powerful help. He put no blame on the cutting blade's edge. He was a considerate man. There the warriors stood in their war gear, eager to go, while their honored lord approached the platform where the other sat. The undaunted hero Beowulf addressed Hrothgar. Beowulf, son of Ecgtheow, spoke. Now we who have crossed the wide sea have to inform you that we feel a desire to return to King Hygelac. Here we have been welcomed and thoroughly entertained. You have treated us well. If there is any favor on earth I can perform beyond deeds of arms, I have done already. Anything that would merit your affections more, I shall act, my lord, with alacrity. If ever I hear from across the ocean that people on your borders are threatening battle, as attackers have done from time to time, I shall land with 1,000 thanes at my back to help your cause. Hygelac may be young to rule a nation, but this much I know about the king of the Geats. He will come to my aid, and want to support me by word and action, in your hour of need when honor dictates that I raise a hedge of spears around you. Then if Hretheric should think about traveling as a king's son to the courts of the Geats, he will find many friends. Foreign places yield more to one who is himself worth meeting. Hrothgar king spoke and answered him, The Lord in his wisdom sent you those words, and they came from your heart. I have never heard so young a man make truer observations. You are strong in body and mature in mind, impressive in speech. If it should come to pass that Hrethel's descendant dies beneath a spear, if deadly battle or sword blade or disease fell upon the prince who guards your people, and you are still alive, I firmly believe, the seafaring Geats won't find a man worthier of acclaim as their king and defender than you, if only you would undertake the lordship of your homeland. My liking for you deepens with time, dear Beowulf. What you have done is to draw two peoples, the Geat nation and the neighboring Danes, strong Viking nations, into shared peace and a pact of friendship, in spite of hatreds we have harbored in the past. For as long as I rule this far-flung land, treasures will change hands, and each side will treat the other with gifts across the gannet's bath. Over the broad sea-world prows will bring presents and tokens. I know your people are beyond reproach in every respect, steadfast in the old way with friend or foe. Then the earl's defender furnished the hero with 12 treasures, and told him to set out, sail with those gifts, safely to home. To the people he loved, but returned promptly, and so the good grey-haired Dane, the high-born king, kissed Beowulf and embraced his neck, then broke down into sudden tears. 2 forebodings disturbed him in his wisdom, but one was stronger. Never more would they ever meet each other face to face, and such was his affection that he could not help being overcome. His fondness for the man was so deep-founded it warmed his heart and wound the heartstrings tight in his breast. The embrace ended, and Beowulf, glorious in his gold regalia, stepped on the green earth. Straining at anchor and ready for boarding, his boat awaited him. So they went on their journey. Hrothgar's generosity was praised repeatedly. Hrothgar was a peerless king until old age sapped his strength and did him mortal harm, as it has done to so many. Down to the waves, then dressed in the web of their chainmail and war-shirts, the young men marched in high spirits. The coast guard spied them, Thane setting forth the same as before. His salute this time from the top of the cliff was far from unmannerly. He galloped to meet them, and as they took their ship and their shining gear, he said how welcome they would be in Geatland. The broad hull was beached on the sand to be cargoed with treasure, horses and war gear. The curved prow motioned, the mast stood high above Hrothgar's breeches in the loaded hold. The guard who had watched the boat was given a sword with gold fittings, and in future days the present would make him a respected man at his place on the mead bench. Then the keel plunged and shook the sea. Away they sailed from Denmark. Upon the noble bark Beowulf stood, upon the galley with good oars, bent for home. Bent for adventure, the Viking warrior would never balk, seeking God's glory and victory. Sail to distant lands, more life was yet before him. He had yet young learned the ways of a gracious tongue and keen mind, trusting in God's providence, mindful of his design, seeking service for his ultimate Lord and Master against the monsters that still lurked in this world.